Still no sign of the British yachtsman Tony Bullimore, whose yacht capsized 1,500 miles off the southwestern coast of Australia 2 days ago. An Australian frigate is on its way to the yacht, but it won't arrive for another 36 hours.
There was lots of discussions amongst the crew and the media on board, and we discussed, if they find this guy alive, this is going to be a huge story.
They are stunning pictures. You often hear about stories like this. You don't often see them enacted and have them as the story dropped. It's a great occasion for still photography.
I was competing in the Vendée Globe race. I was about 800 miles from Antarctica. I got into a very, very severe, violent storm. It was blowing up to 75, 80 knots of wind, which is big winds. Mountainous seas, I mean, sort of 6, 8-story building waves, you know, it was really, really gruesome. All of a sudden the keel snapped off the boat instantly capsized, the windows caved in, the boat filled up with water. It's a pretty grim situation. And the only thing I could do was survive. That was my main mission, and at the same time try to put out the distress beacon to let people know that I was in trouble, and hoping that that someone would come and rescue me.
It was the furthest south that the Australian Defence Force had effected an operation. It was 1,400 nautical miles, or 2,600 kilometres south, a little bit to the west of the southwest corner of Australia.
I'm now travelling at 26 knots, and hopefully I may be able to improve a little bit on my arrival time down there.
Reconnaissance aircraft that have gone through had not spotted any sign of life whatsoever. So we were just thinking, well, if he's alive, he'll be alive in the upturned hull. But how long can a man survive in an upturned hull in those conditions?
It was impossible to keep myself dry, that's the first thing. I had a survival suit on, it wasn't a dry suit, so I'm wet all the time. Most of the time I had to try to get out of the water, which was pretty impossible anyway, because the water was rolling all over it's like the washing machine from hell inside the boat.
The search is now going on with night cameras. By midnight tonight, the rescue vessel should be there. Divers have said if Tony Bullimore is not in his yacht, and his life raft is, the rescue will be called off.
We couldn't see the yacht until we were around 1,000 yards from her. And the Orion aircraft are going to come through, drop flares for us, so we're looking for smoke as well. But everything was white.
That was very eerie. My impression was this was a graveyard. There was no way anybody was going to get out of that alive.
We got up alongside the boat and I turned round to the XO and I said, well, I better see if he's still here. I said, chuck us a hammer and I'll give her a tap and see what happens. So they passed me a hammer and I struck the hull 3 times. As hard as I could, and to everybody's amazement we heard this muffled help.
It was at this time where I was framed on the hull and the guys trying to hack through that I noticed a little orange dot appear in the water just in front of the hull, and I thought, that's him. Jesus Christ, he's alive.
Guys, we've just had some great news. Mr. Bullimore has been found in the hull of the yacht and he's alive. Should be okay. They'll get him on Adelaide pretty soon. Yeah, and the wily old fox has disappeared in.
It was incredible. Everyone on the ship was just absolutely elated. I was very euphoric to see this guy still alive. It was an incredible feeling. I'll never forget it.
That was when the story changed from being just another rescue to a worldwide news event. And gave me the shivers. It just sharpened up your concentration. Saying, hell, I better not foul up.
Doc said to keep him still, and then he turned around and said, "Oh, you know, if you didn't have a beard, I'd kiss you." And I said, "Well, don't let that stop you."
We knew that once Bullimore was brought on the ship, that he'd be taken to the sick bay. So the rush was actually to get down there before they got Bullimore down there.
God, I never thought I'd be here. I've got to be honest, I've been in some situations in my life before which I could tell you about, but this was the hardest.
You're there thinking, this is the news picture I've been dreaming of taking all my life. So what am I going to do with it? 2,500 kilometres from land, I've got to get it somewhere. It took 45 minutes to transmit each photograph off the ship. $450 transmission time for each picture. I believe the total bill for media usage of the naval phone was around about $20,000.
The pictures arrived on our desks within minutes of the rescue. They were amazing pictures. You see this tiny orange-covered figure popping up at the back of the boat looking to see where his rescuers are, who are at the front of the boat. He then swims round, he's plucked out of the water, he's wrapped up in tin foil to keep him alive, and he's brought in. He kisses his rescuers, he is hauled aboard, and he's got a great expression on his face. It was right up our street.
Nicola Horlick, the city pension fund manager, has announced her intention to sue her former employer unless she's allowed to return to her job.
She was a wealthy woman, big salaries, telephone number salaries, dealing with big money. She had a label, Superwoman, and you know, she was a determined lady.
I cannot believe that this would have been such a big, in inverted commas, story as far as the newspapers were concerned if I hadn't been a woman.
Nicola Horlick was suspended because her boss thought that she was trying to move to another firm with about 20 of her team.
This would be very damaging to a business which is all about people managing other people's money, and could have been very serious. So Deutsche Morgan Grenfell had to take action very quickly.
I did not expect to be suspended. I sat there thinking, this is so unfair, I can't allow this to happen without having had my chance to say something. As far as I was concerned, I hadn't done anything wrong.
Nicola first came to attention on the city pages. The story then developed the following day to become more of a news story.
I'd actually gone down to an address in Kensington and I had the bare bones of the story, which was that she'd been fired, but beyond that there was no brief, it was just a doorstep. We started off thinking that she probably didn't want us there, and that changed fairly quickly.
I said to them, look, these people have taken away my job. They haven't given me any chance to have a right to reply. I think this is extremely unfair. Come with me, we're going to go and try and get my job back. So they said, well, okay, good.
Viv called me as soon as she came out and said she wants us to go with her. And no, my response was, yeah, go, go, go.
She left us at Kensington, and I actually followed her, and I stayed with her to Finsbury Circus.
She was in total control. We didn't know what her next move was, but we were willing to play along with it because it was producing good stories, good pictures.
Gradually, a group of people gathered around me, and I said, "Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go in there." And I said, "I'm sure we won't get past the security guard, but we'll try."
She went straight for the stairs and up 3 or 4 flights with us all behind, and because there was by this time a fair size of following people, the security guards couldn't actually get past us to get up to her to stop it.
We walked onto the floor where my boss sat, went to his office. Unfortunately, he wasn't there, so it was a bit of an anticlimax. But anyway, there was then a huge tussle. There was all these people sort of struggling with these photographers and trying to get them out. No one dared to touch me, so I was completely untouched.
I think they kind of hit them so fast they didn't know what was happening. So it made some good images there as well. I mean, hands coming out, stretching, trying to stop cameramen and take pictures, and it was all, it's good news picture stories.
Now we hear she's off to Frankfurt to negotiate with her employer.
By the time I got to the airport, there was a huge crowd waiting for me, including television cameras, radio, everything. And I mean, I was completely overcome by this. I thought, I can't believe this is all getting slightly out of control.
She was consciously involving us in her whole day, basically. And she was making it clear that having decided to use us, that she would make it possible for us to go the whole way with her. You can make your own decisions as to whether she was effectively manipulating us or whether or not we went with it because it was a good story.
Good morning.
There I was, completely alone. These people had befriended me and were being very nice to me. I mean, this may all sound ridiculously naive, but I was drawn to them because I felt so unloved and so unwanted and so upset.
Those two together.
Right, tomorrow morning's front page is Superwoman Goes to War in the Daily Mail. MGM in big drive to reassure fund clients. That's the Financial Times' rather drier treatment of the same story about Nicola Horlick.
What was fascinating about the way the pictures were used is when it was the news story, the splash story, Superwoman Goes to War, they used very aggressive, almost as if she had blood on her teeth pictures. And she was obviously going to bury those teeth in the hapless flanks of some grey-suited gentleman in Frankfurt. Then you had Nicola Supermum, not just Superwoman, Nicola in her kitchen, Nicola with her kids, Nicola taking the children out for a walk.
I got rid of the photographers on the Saturday by doing a pact with them. They would not have been prepared to accept me going to the park by myself. They would still have pursued me because what they wanted was pictures of my children. And I just felt that I had to do what was sensible, which was allow them to take those photographs.
To women, to a lot of women, they could relate to her on 2 levels. One, that they could feel, wow, we women can do it. But it also appealed on a not so admirable level, which was sheer jealousy. And of course, this mixture of admiration and rage was extremely effective in circulation terms. And that's why you could run 34 stories on one minor financial story.
Justice must be done, as I said as I walked through the Morgan Rebel.
The winner is the Spice Girls for Say You'll Be There.
people have been killed and 60 injured in two major pile-ups on the M42. The police called the scenes quite horrific.
Doctors have predicted that Elizabeth Taylor will make a full recovery after she underwent brain surgery yesterday. The actress's condition is described as comfortable.
Elizabeth Taylor had a brain tumor and required immediate surgery. Then she invited in Harry Benson to do the official post-operative photographs of her, showing how successful the surgery was. These were the exclusive official photos that she was going to give out to Life magazine in the United States, Hello magazine in the United Kingdom.
She'd been in our cover 13 times, and first time in 1947 when she was in National Velvet. So she had a history with Life magazine.
Elizabeth Taylor has been in the public eye for all of her adult life, going through many changes. First, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Then she was the wickedest woman in the world, breaking up marriages, divorcing her husbands. Then she became the saddest woman in the world because she was bloated and fat. She's been through it all. Now she is the patron saint of survivors. No matter what human experience anybody's had, it's like Elizabeth Taylor's done it first.
It was strange at first to see her, because I remember her the way she was. You know, they didn't call her a great beauty for nothing. And she had this scar which went like from ear to ear, right across just about the center of her head, like an old soccer ball. It's kind of very coarse stitching. She said to me, "Oh, Harry, how do I look?" I said, "You look like Sinead O'Connor." She went, "Ah!" She laughed. She's got a funny laugh, you know. My main thing is to get a picture as quick as possible because, you know, people do change their mind.
What makes this picture so refreshing is that too few people allow themselves to be shown as people. They allow themselves to be shown usually as they see their image or their persona.
The cynical view would be that this is a woman who's selling perfume. She wanted the publicity. The benevolent view is this is a woman who has given a lot of money and attention to charities. It's her way of saying, look at me, you can get through this too.
Miss Taylor is resting comfortably in the intensive care unit here at the hospital. The tumor appears to be benign. The tumor is totally removed.
A few days after surgery, as she was leaving the hospital, photographer Phil Ramey caught an unofficial photograph of her through the car window, which actually hit the news before the official photographs did.
I had heard that she had agreed to do a setup with Harry Benson, who was working under the aegis of Life magazine, and I also knew what kind of money he was selling his material for in Europe. So I knew that if there ever was a chance to break an exclusive and to do well with this picture, that would be the way. When driving like a madman on a two-lane country road that goes from the beach all the way to her house in Bel Air, right at the driveway where I could see the car coming up, I recognized the Mercedes-Benz coming up the hill at about 40 miles an hour and sitting in the front passenger seat, but obstructed by the banding at the top of the windscreen that keeps the sun from going in was Liz Taylor. As the car was ready to go by, knowing I would only have one shot with a strobe, I forego the shot through the front windscreen, and I go to shoot her through the side window. The car went by at about 40 miles an hour, and I had the camera so up close that the actual mirror on the car tipped the camera as it went by. So the lens was literally maybe 4 inches, 5 inches from the passenger glass. Sometimes you know, and sometimes you hope, sometimes you even pray. But this was one of the times I knew I had something.
The Mirror and the Mail probably paid in the region of about £40,000 to get those pictures, £20,000 each. They wouldn't make £20,000 on the extra sales. They probably didn't put on enormous sales. But that's not the reason they do it. They do it for the kudos of their newspaper, for building a reputation for getting these kinds of shots. And that's how newspapers build up readership loyalty.
There wasn't a major market throughout the world that didn't use the picture. And it ran everywhere.
There's a posed feeling to Harry Benson shots, which you can't overcome. The holding of the dog in that certain position. The smile, which is obviously that pin-on smile. Whereas the strength of the Raimi snapshot is that it's not posed.
I think there is an insatiable appetite on the part of the public for ill and ailing celebrities, partly because we always want to hear about people who have more troubles than we do, and partly because you want to see that people who are having problems can get through this. In a way, celebrities are like our extended family.
It's very interesting that in the magazine representations of the pose shots and in the newspaper picture of the paparazzi shot, they were all portrayed as brave Liz, courageous Liz, wonderful Liz. And so in that sense, it worked out brilliantly for her.
For most of the day, journalists waited in vain for a statement from Piers Merchant following allegations that he'd had an affair with a 17-year-old nightclub hostess.
This is an election which photo opportunities don't count for a great deal. You've got to deliver a message.
Read it,
Yeah, just
go
back to your constituency office and prepare to distribute more leaflets.
It was the most tightly controlled election of all time. Everyone wanted to make certain that their party leader was never photographed with anything that might look bad symbolically. At the very beginning, John Major was photographed on a racing car without wheels, so it looked as if the wheels had come off. And that immediately set the alarm bells ringing with his spin doctors. And they were desperate to make sure that nothing like that happened again. Everything had to be sanitized.
It was a long election, this one. I mean, normally they're 3 weeks. It went on and on and on. The Tories were not producing images. I mean, the photographers actually who were with the tour had their own T-shirts printed with kind of a camera on it and a cross going across it for no pictures.
There was talk of a debate between John Major and Tony Blair. They couldn't agree terms. The Labour Party turned down the Tory offer, and the Tories decided that the Labour Party had behaved like chickens and that Tony Blair had wimped out of the debate. So they produced a chicken who was to follow Tony Blair everywhere he went, and often quite successfully got into Blair events.
We did see the Tory chicken quite a few times. I did get a couple of frames of it when it had its beak ripped off, which was quite funny. It did become a bit of a pain in the end, because you'd be there doing a job and all of a sudden this chicken would turn up, and one of us would have to be on chicken watch. We'd have to keep an eye on what the chicken done, just in case it managed to get through to Blair. Somebody was always distracted or having to keep one eye on the chicken and one eye on what Blair was doing.
Peck him, Dave, peck him!
One shot we got of Tony Blair throughout the campaign was him doing the Blair wave, which is very characteristic. It involves waving your arm in the air, almost as if you were going to do a Heil Hitler, but in fact wiggling your hand at the end. And it's accompanied by an upward look, a raised visionary look like this, as if you've just spotted an old friend. So So there's that, but there's also the kind of grip and grin, which is to manhandle as many people's hands and arms as you possibly can. And again, what it does is implies that people need to be so close to him, so many people want to touch him.
The longest campaign is over. Each party leader has rested his case. Tonight, number 10 stands empty, awaiting the nation's verdict on who will be entrusted with the seat of power.
We could tell that something big was going to happen. So the focus is all on the Labour winning. You know, what are you going to get out of this? What is Blair's picture going to be?
On election night, I wanted a triumphant Tony Blair, punching the air, something really wonderful. I sent Harry Page out to get it. He had spent time with the Prime Minister throughout the entire election. He was trusted by him. He had done great photographs of him before, and I asked him to stick to him like glue and look for that picture.
I know you'll be nervous, but just try and get something out of him. Tell him, you know, tell him anything you like, but we need that picture.
As they arrived at the Sedgefield account, he walked up and we were shouting and screaming, you know, give us a big smile or a yes or something like that, you know, done it or whatever. He just looked, you know, he thought, listen guys, you've had enough. I think it was. We've been doing all this for 6 weeks, you know. I think he thought, look, hang on a minute, you know, I'm running this show now.
Well, a bit of triumph for this, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's just not doing it. They've been pleading with him to do it. You know, punch the air or box a salute or hands up above his head, and he is just not doing it.
He must have known by that stage from the exit polls that he was going to win and win huge. He knew he was on his way to Downing Street and probably knew that this was going to be the biggest majority the Labour government had ever gained, and yet he's giving this very mild sort of wave. It's partly because they're absolutely petrified of repeating the Neil Kinnock at the Sheffield rally in 1992 experience when the Labour Party behaved as if they'd won the election, seemed to be gloating and cheering and taking the electorate for granted.
We're all right! We're all right!
He's obviously not going to repeat a Kinnock, is he? You know, when Kinnock walked in Sheffield about 10 days before the election.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that.
Yes, well, remember it.
We got this fairly bland wave, sort of presidential wave high, you know, and walked in. And it was 11:30, desperately up against Edition Times.
Yes, Harry. What's your best picture? Best picture? Right. Yep, okay, I'll get the waving one up as well. Okay, you're out of breath. We'll give you a day off next month.
In 3 minutes, that'll be in London. And in 4 minutes, it'll be in the paper at Frank.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Break down, baby. Mickey, I've got one more here. He's quite triumphant looking in this. Yeah, hang on. Stuart, a better one of the waving, even bigger smile on his face here. It's got a bigger smile on his face.
Harry is first class at taking his moment. He's got a good front page picture. It wasn't the sensational one I would have loved to have had. Harry's on the front page. He shares it with a massive headline. He shares it with lots of other details.
It's the sun on election morning, and it's what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. There's a complete contrast between the two elements, one of which is big screaming red yes, which is what you might expect from a footballer who's just scored the winning goal at Wembley. Down here you've got this very modest sort of wave. Now that's because he's completely in control all the time that there might be a photographer there.
If he'd gone for it big time, it would have been the whole of that front page. We made up for it the next day though.
The next day he had an absolutely sensational picture of the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, his wife and his children framed in the doorway of number 10. It was the perfect picture, and we used a wipeout the day after the election.
Now, Hong Kong people are to run Hong Kong. That is the unshakable destiny.
Quite a few of the tabloids do. Princess Diana's Riviera holiday with Mohammed Al Fayed.
The first thing we got was this picture of her being embraced by Mohammed Fayed, a very controversial figure in British politics. And I think if you remember, looking back, that photograph produced a very mixed response.
There was an episode where she went up and spoke to the press corps who were on a boat, and her parting words to them, as they report it, were, "You're all in for a very big surprise." Now, a comment like that is obviously likely to engender a huge amount of interest. What is this surprise? What could it be? Nobody put two and two together and thought that there could be a connection with Dodi Al Fayed.
Hordes of photographers wanted pictures of Diana with a new man, and especially since that new man was Dodi Fayed. They knew they'd be saleable if they could get them in an intimate clinch of any kind. Standing next to each other would have been fine, but if they could get them more intimate than that, so much the better. They knew that they were on to a big sale. We can feel fairly certain that it went for about 500,000 overall here. There have been suggestions that it was 3 million by the time it had finished, although some people have revised that down to 2 million. Whatever it is, 2 or 3 million, it's probably the most lucrative set of shots ever taken by any photographer.
I received a phone call to say that there had been these amazing photographs that had been taken, and I certainly didn't expect Mary Brenner to phone me up, but he did, and he asked me if I would represent his interests in the United Kingdom. I know the place where he took the pictures, and I knew that there would have been thousands of other holidaymakers around. This was a very public place. This was not a private beach. They were there for all to see, and once I knew that, I felt very comfortable representing these photographs and selling these photographs in Britain.
Under the old rules laid down by the Press Complaints Commission, there was no doubt that those pictures were not intrusive, in the sense that they were in a public place and therefore they were fair game. But if you look at it from a different angle, if you look at it perhaps morally, and you look at it, of course, with this wonderful 2020 hindsight, they were, of course, intrusive, because these people clearly wanted to be alone.
Under the new rules announced earlier this month, long lens photography like this will be intrusive if someone is obviously seeking to be private at that moment. The question remains, though, could Diana, the most photographed woman in the world, have really expected privacy on this boat? The papers could have argued a public interest defence, which would have meant that her complaint wouldn't have succeeded.
There were no complaints about them. I've spoken to a number of tabloid editors who had to make the decision after the Sunday Mirror had first rights to the pictures, whether they were going to go ahead and run those pictures as second rights. They all say that they consulted with her private office, and the message they got back from her private office was that she was entirely relaxed about these pictures coming out.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, that this woman who created intense interest, that the intensity of interest could grow, so that when those pictures appeared, yet more photographers hurled themselves down to the south of France, desperate to poke their lenses forward to get another shot.
Obviously the floodgates opened. They were obviously an item and people wanted more. I was very fortunate enough to know when she was going back down to the south of France, and I received very good information whilst I was down there and was able to photograph them where other people didn't. I photographed Princess Diana and Dodi 3 or 4 times during that holiday. I stopped about 2 days before the end of the holiday. They then went on to Paris. I suppose in a way I am relieved that I didn't go up to Paris.
Within the last few moments, the Press Association has reported that Diana, Princess of Wales, has died. And as soon as there is any further news, we will bring it to you.
From the very first moment you heard about Diana dying, chased by paparazzi, leather jackets, motorbikes, speed, whatever, you just knew it was going to be a hard time for photographers.
On the morning that the Princess of Wales died, I was down at Buckingham Palace, and there was a lot of people coming in laying flowers in front of us, and I was stationed there from about 5, 6 in the morning or so. One man came up and started to have a go at the press.
They killed Diana.
Commercial journalists and commercial journalists.
They killed Diana.
Everywhere, the reaction on Sunday was the media killed the princess, and that's what it was on Sunday. And it was like one of the worst, or maybe the worst day of my career.
We just hounded the girl to death, and you're still here with your cameras, aren't you?
I thought it was just natural. Something tragic had happened in their lives, or what they felt a part of, and they were just attacking the obvious target.
Every hour or every day of the week was like full of new events, of things developing, of shocking events. That I think the funeral was, the last day of the Mad Week.
I got to the stand about 5 o'clock in the morning. I really didn't have anything in mind except to take the best picture that I could, and I didn't know what it was going to be.
A simple card on the first of those reads, just saying you may have been able to read it. Mummy.
Yeah, mummy. Get the runners to tell the photographers they need the wreath with mummy on it. It's a little wreath at the front.
Let's not get everyone.
We always have the television on. Editors in the office are terrible second guessers of photographers. But then in this event, we were aware of the fact that they wouldn't have actually been able to read with their lenses what was on the card. They wouldn't necessarily have seen the picture.
Helgen's got a radio, shall I call it?
Yes.
Get Helgen, phone Helgen.
This is
I got a radio call, so I picked it up, and it was an editor at the London office. And because of that radio call, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was the only person in that stand where I was that knew of this card. All the other guys did not see it. I frantically had to adjust my camera, because as it rounded that corner in front of me, it came into direct sunlight. And then it was just a matter of focusing on the card itself. I shut it upright, and then fired off about 6, 7 frames, I can't remember how many. And that was it. My job was done for the day.
We were delighted largely because we had in the office all been so affected by the image anyway. It was a terribly poignant picture, a little card with Mummy on it, and we were very pleased that it had worked.
As a photo editor, you're watching history on television. You can see close-ups fleetingly, and you look at that and you say, I wonder if anyone got a close-up of that. And of course, then when it drops in 2 hours later, you know, you think, yeah, that's the way to go. Maybe this is the way to do it. It's very poignant. It's very moving. Maybe you don't need tears, crying, crowds and whatever. And again, this picture, you'd never planned this picture the day before. So for the first edition of the Observer on that day, it was ideal. But then half an hour later, after making that decision, and that paper's gone, you get this big close-up. This is a powerful picture. It's about these 2 boys who've just lost their mum, and this future King of England's lost his ex-wife. And all the drama that says. And I think the close-up of these 3 is what it was all about.
The picture I really, really wanted, or I thought that I wanted, was young William and Harry. I wasn't interested in anybody else or any other facet of the story. And I wanted somehow to connect the world with whatever was, to feel something about what they were feeling. And not just sympathy, but maybe a little understanding. Just try to connect with them. I put a pretty insanely long lens on because I couldn't stand in front of them, obviously. And the scene presented itself. And all I was interested in, I was really interested in the boys, but then when Charles lined up and started, it was the first time I really saw emotion on his face. And the emotion was, oh God, what are they thinking now? What am I going to do? And that's really what's on Charles's face is, now what? Now what? And when that happened, just immediately, I knew I had it.
I remember saying, right, I've got this picture, I've got it, this is the frame. And then it's a question of checking it with other people, just to see, is what I'm seeing, you know, I'm a father myself, it's kind of how I would react to something like this. Am I too close to this? Can we forget the pomp and ceremony? Can we forget the flowers? And there it is, and I still think it's a good call. Looking at it now, I think it's a very powerful picture. It's big, raw, and yet there it is, and it works.
6 people have died and more than 150 hurt in the worst rail crash in a decade.
The Algerian authorities say Islamic extremists killed at least 85 people and wounded 60 others in an attack just outside Algiers. Survivors say the number of dead could be as high as 200. Many were killed in their own homes, which were then set on fire.
There was this dreadful massacre, whole families being wiped out, huge tragedy. One picture arrives on the screen that just has such a powerful presence to it. It was 2 women, one woman sort of comforting another woman who'd lost 8 children, I believe, and the woman comforting had lost all her family as well. One of the most difficult places to get pictures from is Algeria. Obviously, it's very difficult work to work there as a photographer. You know, once you're known as a photographer, you get hassled, you get checked every 5 minutes.
Being a journalist in Algeria is quite dangerous. Some 60 of them have already been assassinated. So we tend to protect our people, and every agency, we all do the same. We tend not to reveal their identity.
Le massacre, il s'est passé vers les coups de 11h ou minuit. Donc nous, on l'a appris vers les coups de 8h du matin. J'arrive à Bentelha. Vu de l'extérieur, sur le quartier de Bentelha, il n'y avait pas d'image à faire. Je me suis dit, tiens, il faut que j'aille à l'hôpital, je vais essayer de faire des blessés. Pour un photographe qui travaille dans un pays qui est plus ou moins à risque, donc je pense qu'il faut être discret. J'arrive à l'hôpital Zmirli et j'étais à l'extérieur, comme tout le monde, en train d'attendre. Je me suis retourné et je vois un attroupement de femmes autour de cette femme. Je me suis dit, mais il se passe quelque chose. Et subitement, je vois la femme. Et ce qui m'a attiré le plus, c'était l'attitude de la femme, son cou qui était beaucoup plus long. Hein. Je voyais cette femme comme ça, et je me suis dit, mais c'est une image à faire. J'ai pris mon appareil photo, je courais vers elle, et à un moment, je voyais des femmes qui étaient en train de s'écarter. C'est comme s'ils me laissaient le passage pour pouvoir faire ma photo. Et eux, ils se sont écartés, c'est pour lui donner beaucoup plus d'air, parce qu'elle était en train de s'évanouir. Cette femme qui a perdu ses enfants, qui a perdu toute sa famille. J'avais fait 6 pauses. J'étais en train de la suivre comment elle était en train de descendre. C'est-à-dire, l'expression de son visage a changé d'un moment à l'autre. Je fais photo, et les policiers qui arrivent vers nous, ils me disent non, il ne fallait pas faire des photos, on vous a avisé et tout. Je dis bon, écoutez, on a fait des photos, on n'a pas fait quelque chose de grave. Bon, ils étaient compréhensibles. Je dis bon, vous quittez les lieux. Je développe les 2 films en même temps. J'ai commencé à scanner et je me suis dit, bon, elle est belle. Bon, peut-être quelques-unes des journaux parisiens ou peut-être le Herald Tribune. Je me dis, voilà, c'est tout.
Because this tremendous picture of Hussein was shown on every front page or in every paper and then on every news magazine, enabled the story to be brought to the attention of the public, to pay more attention to the Algerian drama.
It's extraordinary how pictures of the living, even when they're grieving, mean more than a picture of a dead person. She embodies the sense of helplessness and savagery, and it brought home to people who have become inured to death abroad that there was something really bad in the state of Algeria going on.
There's something very biblical about the quality of it and the colours, and I know you can say, oh, there he is getting off on the aesthetics, but it's just a wonderful image that went round the world to say, look at this dreadful tragedy has affected these 2 people, and through the horror these 2 people went through, you can feel the horror of the whole nation. I know there's no dead bodies in it. I know there's no mortar shells on the walls, but this is the real tragedy of Algeria.
Having been found guilty of second-degree murder, the 19-year-old au pair from Cheshire is facing life imprisonment with no chance of parole for 15 years.
think everyone was so surprised that she was found guilty. This is the image that everyone will remember, the shock, the horror. As we all know, the sentence has been lessened and she may well get off altogether. But people still remember that picture of that trial. That is the frame.
We can point in this picture.
In court, they allow one photographer in, one TV camera. And so that we don't fight amongst ourselves, we just put it into a rotation. The Globe, the Herald, Reuters, and the Associated Press rotated during this case. And it just so happened that Ted Fitzgerald, our photographer, got the call. And I said, it looks like you're the lucky one. You're going to get to cover Louise tomorrow, and it looks like the verdict's going to come in.
I said, okay, Ted. Although I tried to sound confident, I wasn't sure if I really wanted to be in there. It was just such a big story, a lot of pressure. But the more I thought about it, I said, it's a challenge. I said, I'll go for it, get a good night's sleep, make sure I come in sharp the next morning. The courtroom opens up at 9. I got there at 8. And well, nothing was happening. I was working on my 12th hour now. We're getting towards 8 o'clock-ish. I had come back from dinner, and I noticed that we could sense some action going on. And sure enough, everybody was brought into the courtroom. The word was given. The jury had come in.
Members of the jury, hearken to your verdict as recorded by the court.
It happened quickly. There was no commercial break. It just said, have you reached a decision, Madam Foreman? She rose and said, yes, we have. At this point, I am on my camera through the viewfinder, frozen on Louise Woodward and her defense team.
Is the defendant guilty or not guilty?
I was anticipating, frankly, a not guilty verdict. I think we all were kind of, leaning that way. So I was loose, fairly loose, because I want, in case there was a lot of hugging and jubilation, well, I wanted to not be too tight. Anyway, I'm looking through the viewfinder, trying to stay steady, trying to be in focus. And out of my left side, I could hear the foreman say, guilty.
Guilty. Guilty of what?
Guilty of murder in the second degree.
Members of the jury, hearken to your verdict as recorded by the court. The jury...
Well, nothing was happening. It seemed like an hour, but I heard something. I heard some whimpering. I saw some hugging going on.
Be seated.
I'm still on them, but I'm also thinking, gee, I wonder what her parents are doing now. Should I go over and take a shot of them, or and what if, I don't know, it's in a quandary. I did go over to the folks, and then came back over, refocused, recomposed, and then something happened. She rose up ever so quickly. I just instinctively hit the shutter, bang, 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 as fast as the motor drive would go. Now, I don't know what I had. You just don't know.
I watched the live broadcast of the thing, and we couldn't see her, so I kept saying to myself under my breath, show your face, show your face, show your face. And then she did, and I said, oh, we have that picture.
I drove back to the Associated Press Bureau, took a deep breath as I entered the door, and I saw Tess, the guy who ran the film for me. He gave me the thumbs up. I go, oh, thank God. I don't know what I had, but that was a good thing to see. Then I went over and viewed the film on the light table, and I go, ooh, that's not bad, thankfully.
Still camera captured her expression, just frozen in time, much more than that fleeting look that she gave on TV. And I think that's why this picture is what I refer to as the shot seen around the world. You don't rarely get a photo with that much impact on a major news story, so it was a dream for anybody who's laying out the front page.
My colleague was over at the courthouse the next day doing the follow-up, and there were some demonstrators outside holding up copies of the Mirror with the headline saying "Stitched Up." A lot of the supporters were using the papers as a vehicle to gain support for Louise and her family, and it was almost like two countries going back and forth now. Whose side are you on?
The Epins, I think it was obvious that they didn't appreciate the support that all of the picture play of Louise's face mounted, and they tried to counter, I believe, and by letting the press get a hold of some of their private photos of Matthew. And the hospital picture was probably the one that shocked most people, and it was pretty obvious at that point that she was trying to get the reaction of how could they support someone who could do this to my baby.
I think it's understandable that the parents who must have felt that the fact that their baby had died, a fact which they will probably never recover from, was being overlooked by the world at large, who seemed to be more interested in releasing a 19-year-old girl.
The future of where this case is going is pretty uncertain right now. We try to keep tabs on where she is, and I know that she's not allowed to leave the Commonwealth until something has been settled, and that could be up to 2 years. So we just have to sit tight and wait till she gets back into court.
The government's banned the sale of beef on the bone after scientific advice that BSE could be transmitted in marrow and bone tissue.